spending his first night in a government detention hotel in Melbourne instead of training for the Australian Open. He'll be there until Monday, when a court will now decide whether or not to deport him. His visa was cancelled yesterday. Border officials said he'd failed to meet the requirements for an exemption to the country's vaccination rules. His rival Rafa Nadal said of the ruling, decisions have consequences. At stake for Djokovic, victory in Australia would see him become the most successful male tennis player ever. Chloe Keedy has the latest.
Novak Djokovic hasn't been seen since he landed in Australia 24 hours ago, but this is believed to be him arriving at an immigration detention hotel. It is the latest leg of an increasingly long and complicated journey for the world number one, who touched down in Melbourne to be told his visa wasn't valid and his medical exemption all but null and void. The tennis star was held here for the best part of 10 hours. Australia's Prime Minister praised the country's border force officials for their diligence.
Rules are rules, and there are no special cases. Entry with a visa requires double vaccination or a medical exemption. I'm advised that such an exemption was not in place, and as a result, he is subject to the same rule as anyone else.
The 9 times Australian Open champion has always called Melbourne his second home, but his exemption from vaccination rules hasn't gone down well here. Tournament organisers and officials from the state it's held in agreed that Djokovic was one of a handful of players that qualified for a medical exemption. But the country's federal government disagrees. Djokovic hasn't publicly confirmed his vaccination status, though he's always defended the right to choose. His longtime rival, Rafael Nadal, who lost to Djokovic at Melbourne Park in 2019, expressed some sympathy for his friend, but said that competitors have to play by the rules.
In some way, I feel sorry for him. But at the same time, he knew the conditions since a lot of months ago. So I went through the COVID. I have been vaccinated twice. And if you do this, you don't have any problem to play here.
Djokovic does have some supporters in Melbourne, many of them Serbian, gathered outside his hotel. He's expected to stay here until Monday, when his case will be heard by a judge in a very different type of court to the one he came to Australia for.
Look, playing in Australia this year was more important than ever for Djokovic, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Melbourne may not be too keen on him at the moment, but Djokovic has always loved Melbourne. He loves the city, he loves the court at Melbourne Park, and this year he was going for his 10th Australian Open, having won the last 3 in a row. But even more importantly than that, this could still be the tournament that makes him the most successful male tennis player of all time. Now, Djokovic, Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer all hold 20 Grand Slams each. And if Djokovic won this tournament, that would put him at 21. So, yes, this really matters to him. He is effectively being held in detention at that quarantine hotel in Melbourne, presumably unable to train. And his lawyers have the weekend now to get together their submissions ahead of that hearing on Monday. But look, the Australian Open is a tournament that Djokovic has dominated for the past few years, and it looks now as though his defence of that title is in doubt before it's even begun.
We'll find out on Monday. Chloe Keedy, thank you very much. Thank you. Here, Boris Johnson has hit out at anti-vax campaigners, saying they are putting mumbo-jumbo on social media and they are completely wrong. With COVID cases still rising, the pressure on hospitals in parts of England shows no sign of abating. With the latest on the Omicron impact on the NHS, here's our political correspondent, Daniel Hewitt.
At the Royal Derby, like hospitals across England, the challenge right now is trying to treat more and more COVID patients with fewer and fewer staff. More than 1,000 workers are off sick, or isolating right now, significantly more than usual, and they're currently considering cancelling all non-emergency surgery. Today, the government confirmed almost 1 in 5 hospitals have declared critical incidents, as the Prime Minister repeated that the best way to deal with this pressure was through vaccination.
The pressures on hospitals are clear. What we've got to do is give the NHS all the help we can through the next period, with all the simplifications of systems, moving staff from one hospital to another, all the ways we can back staff up, but also make sure that the people who are likely to get ill get vaccinated first. But I also want to say to the anti-vax campaigners, the people who are putting this mumbo-jumbo on social media, they are completely wrong. And you haven't heard me say that before.
Boris Johnson is standing by his decision last month to hold off bringing in more restrictions to tackle this wave of Omicron. But the College of Paramedics told us the situation right now is only getting worse.
Pretty much all over the country, we're getting reports that paramedics are waiting a very long time to hand over patients, and the patients are waiting a very long time to get an ambulance response. Some services are seeing 20-30% of staff off sick currently with coronavirus, and that means that those few who are left are then working with a system that's under significant pressure. The emergency departments don't have enough space, the hospitals are full, so we're seeing the whole system really starting to struggle.
And some are waiting so much longer. Aisling is 19 months old. She has kidney reflux, has suffered sepsis, and in November 2020 was told she needs an operation. Over a year later, she's still waiting and still has no date.
It's very upsetting that it does feel everything's had to stop for COVID. She's still only 1. I don't want her to have to be dealing with this. There's still going to be a year to 18 months of antibiotics and checkups after the surgery itself. So, you know, you're nearly talking her being at school. I'd really loved for this to have been nipped in the bud by that point.
Omicron may be milder, but its impact is not on a health system that was already barely coping. Daniel Hewitt, ITV News.
So for more of a flavour of how hospitals are coping right now, we can join Yasmin Bodlbai, who's at the Royal Derby Hospital, and Sarah Cooper at University Hospital in Milton Keynes. To Yasmin first, how is it there?
Well, Nina, we talk about winter pressure, and it feels like there's a storm brewing inside the hospitals as well. As we've been hearing, there are now a staggering number of staff who are absent at the trust which runs this hospital, the Royal Derby. 1,000 staff are off with either COVID, they're either sick with it or they're isolating, and in total 1,800 staff members are off. That's 13% of the total workforce. And just to put that into a little bit of context, normally at this time of year they'd expect around 4% of staff to be off. So massive challenges there, and of course it all has a knock-on effect on things like routine surgery, which, if you're waiting for it, is anything but routine. The CEO was speaking about an hour ago. He said there's a backlog still of about 5,000 patients waiting for planned operations, and he is now saying with a heavy heart that it's very possible that they will have to start thinking about cancelling some of those operations over the next few weeks. So huge pressures and some very difficult decisions to come.
And here at Milton Keynes Hospital, the number of COVID patients has trebled over the last fortnight. So 2 weeks ago, there were about 20 patients being treated inside the hospital here. Today, that number around 60. And that doesn't mean just that more beds are being used up inside the hospital, but of course, non-COVID patients and COVID patients have to be kept separate, and that has implications on the amount of space available inside the wards and, of course, on staffing. Now, at the moment, there are about 300 staff off sick here. That's about 10% of the workforce, and half of those that are off sick are off with something COVID-related. Earlier on, I spoke to the chief executive here at the hospital, and he said that they are a long way off having to declare a so-called critical incident here, as other hospitals have done and are considering doing. He said they still have many options open to them before they have to do that, perhaps cancelling routine appointments, but of course those may have already been delayed or rescheduled before, so they would not take that lightly. But he did acknowledge that this is a hospital under pressure.
Sarah and Yasmin, thank you very much both for those updates. Let's return to Westminster now and join our political correspondent Daniel Hewitt. A real change in tone from the Prime Minister today, taking on the anti-vaxxers for the first time in this whole pandemic.
That's right, Nina, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that from both the Prime Minister and government ministers. They really do feel like their strategy of keeping us in Plan B, no more restrictions, but really pushing for more people to get vaccinated, more people to get boosted, is the right approach here. We saw Boris Johnson yesterday say it was absolutely crazy that some people were turning down the vaccine and then ended up in intensive care. Previously, Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, said people who were refusing the vaccine and could have it were idiots. Whether Boris Johnson goes that far, I don't think that will happen, but I think that language, that tone, will see more of that. There are big questions over for the Prime Minister, not just over the staff shortages right now, but staff shortages in the NHS beyond this pandemic. A report out today by the Health Select Committee here in Westminster has criticised the government for having no long-term plan for dealing with the 93,000 vacancies currently in the NHS. They're having a huge knock-on effect of hundreds of thousands of people currently waiting for long-term care. Yes, there's a staff shortage now, but the Prime Minister and the government will come under more pressure to answer the question of what to do over the long-term problems in the NHS.
Daniel Hewitt, thank you very much. Thank you. Still to come, government ministers weigh in over the Colston statue verdict. And, oh yes, she did, a rare photo of the Queen in Panto goes on sale. But first, a year ago today, the world watched in shock as Trump's supporters stormed the US Capitol. Today, it's expected President Biden will blame his predecessor for what he'll describe as the chaos and carnage, which also cost 5 lives. Our correspondent Robert Moore was the only TV reporter embedded with the rioters. Before we speak to him, let's take a look at his exclusive eyewitness report from inside the building as he and his crew followed the mob who claimed the election had been stolen from Trump.
For Capitol Hill police officers, this was a losing battle.
This is exactly what was feared. But in no way is this a surprise. It has been fueled by the president's rhetoric, and it's increasingly clear this election has not healed the wounds. It has simply amplified them.
We followed the aggrieved and infuriated Trump supporters as they stormed the building. And for a few heady moments they felt they had won a precious victory. They reached and entered the Speaker's office itself, although Nancy Pelosi and other lawmakers had already been evacuated to safety.
Here you go, brother.
As we filmed, protesters tore down Pelosi's nameplate.
And so here we are right now inside the halls of Congress. This is exactly what so many anticipated, and yet the Capitol Hill police are doing their best, but failing to control the situation.
As crowds tonight are still swirling around Congress. And America's long journey as a stable democracy appears to be in genuine doubt.
Robert, such a significant day in America's history. How will America be marking it?
Well, Americans will be divided, as they are in almost every aspect of their politics. Joe Biden, in the next few minutes, will be here on Capitol Hill giving a speech saying that Donald Trump is a singular threat to American democracy, and trying, along with the January the 6th House Committee investigating events, to draw a bright line between Donald Trump, his predecessor, and the chaos and carnage of a year ago. But equally, you know, there are many Republicans who will say that these events on the Hill today are basically a liberal narrative trying to distract Americans from the current political issues of inflation and of COVID. And, you know, I've also been speaking to some of the insurrectionists I was with a year ago, and they are still saying to me they have no regret and no remorse about what happened. They are portraying their involvement not as an act of treachery or of insurrection, but rather...
Trump is still the most important key political figure in the Republican Party. Could he make a political comeback?
I mean, that's exactly the point, and that is the issue arching over this first anniversary. Donald Trump, if anything, from political exile in Mar-a-Lago, has actually tightened his grip on the Republican Party, and those who opposed him, particularly House members who even voted to impeach him from within the Republican Party, they face political extinction. So if there isn't a kind of drama with his health over the next year or two, it is extremely likely that Donald Trump runs once more for the Republican nomination and potentially will win it, and then there is the possibility that he faces Joe Biden again in the 2024 presidential election cycle and wins the presidency for a second time. So all of that is absolutely an issue very much in the minds of Americans as they mark this first anniversary.
Given that context that you've just explained, how much concern is there that there could be a repeat of what you witnessed last year?
Well, I think the spectre of election violence is absolutely alive in American politics now. That's perhaps the greatest significance of January the 6th and the events and the chaos and carnage of a year ago is it reintroduced violence as part of the political conversation, and polling suggests that. I mean, the polling has been out in the last 48 hours suggesting that 68% of Americans believe that actually what happened a year ago was a harbinger of greater political violence to come. 71% of Republicans believe that Donald Trump actually still won that election. So you can understand there how the whole talk of political violence is re-entering the equation just as we approach the next election cycle of the midterms at the end of this year and then the presidential race in 2024.
Robert Moore, thank you very much. Thank you. Here, Britain is not a country where destroying public property can ever be acceptable. The words of the government minister Grant Shapps this morning after 4 people were cleared yesterday of tearing down the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston. He said new powers drafted into the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill will close a potential loophole limiting the prosecution of those who damage memorials. The memorial to the 17th century slave merchant was pulled down during a Black Lives Matter protest in June 2020 before being rolled into the water. The so-called Colston Force celebrated their win outside Bristol Crown Court after they were found not guilty. Let's join our correspondent Dan Rivers now, who is in Oxford, site of the Rhodes statue, which some want removed. Dan, the government saying the forced removal of that statue will not be tolerated.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about introducing this 10-year sentence jail sentence for toppling statues as a deterrent, as they put it. Of course, the problem is that in the case of the so-called Colston Fall, they were cleared by a jury. Whether a jail sentence hanging over them potentially would have deterred them from taking action, I think is open to debate. People are still digesting that acquittal yesterday and what it means for campaigns, for example, here to get rid of the statue of Cecil Rhodes over Oriel College here in Oxford. But certainly the Prime Minister this morning seemed to be counselling against anyone taking direct action in the way they did in Bristol.
If people democratically want to remove a statue or whatever, that's fine. But I think that in general, we should preserve our cultural, artistic, historical legacy. That's my view.
Talking to one of the lead campaigners here in Oxford a few minutes ago, who was saying, look, this will undoubtedly re-energise their campaign to have this statue removed. There is a plaque now here giving some more context to it, but the statue is still up. They are hoping it will be removed eventually. The key difference, the campaigner told me here to Bristol, is they physically can't get to it, so it's very difficult to take any direct action here, but they're hoping the pressure of this verdict will mean eventually the authorities here in Oxford will have no choice but to take it down.
Dan Rivers, thank you very much. Finally stored away in an archive for 70 years, a rare photograph of the Queen and Princess Margaret in a royal pantomime at Windsor Castle is now up for sale. Taken in December 1944, when the future Queen was 18 and Princess Margaret was 14, it shows the then cast of Old Mother Red Riding Boots. The plot brought together elements from different fairy tales, and it's thought as many as 600 people, including the armed forces and local children, came to see it over 3 days. Belonging to a former superintendent of Windsor Castle, the photo, along with a programme and ticket for the show, is estimated to go for around £1,500. It was one of a number of pantomimes performed by the princesses to lift spirits during the Second World War. Some were performed to evacuees, and money was raised to buy things like blankets for soldiers. Her Majesty also took the lead role in Aladdin. And that's all we've got time for now. Mary's here at 6:30 from me. Bye-bye.